Hi there, this video is to give you a really good case study for ecosystems at risk. This is going to be our second case study on Shelly Beach. So our sort of goal for this video is to prepare you to prepare a great case study with lots of information and knowledge. Okay, so let's have a look at what the syllabus says. It says that you need to use 2 case studies with spatial patterns, dimensions, biophysical interactions, the nature and rate of change which affects ecosystem functioning, the human impacts, and then traditional and contemporary management practices. So what I've done, I've just gone through each of these dot points and I'll just explain to you so you can use that information and have a lot of knowledge for your case studies ready for your extended piece of writing. Okay, so let's have a look at the spatial patterns that I mentioned. Obviously the Shelly Beach is located roughly about 80 kilometres north of Sydney on the central coast, New South Wales. Obviously the altitude starts at 0 metres and some of the sand dunes can rise to about 20 metres above sea level. The latitude is 33 degrees south. The size of Shelly Beach is about 130 hectares. The shape, obviously it's beach shape. We've got 2 rocky outcrops at obviously North Shelly and then at Bateau Bay, and that's the sort of where the beach is. The beach profile is pretty steep in places because of sand dunes, and that's what makes it an ecosystem at risk of sand dunes. And then obviously continuity is part of mainland Australia. The material, the sand, where use of sand dunes has been transported obviously from other parts of Australia through obviously waves, weathering, erosion, transportation, that type of thing. So they're the spatial patterns and dimensions. Really important that you know those basics because it affects obviously the function of the ecosystem. The biophysical interactions. So obviously weather and climate is really important. And obviously this has come straight from the syllabus. So obviously climate change, whether natural or human, would impact the sea levels, which could affect the sand dune formation and obviously the transformation of sand dunes as well. So if sea levels do rise, then those sand dunes will be destroyed. If they decrease, we might actually see sand dunes increase in size because there might be more sand available, and I'll talk about how they're formed in a minute, but there could be more sand available to make those sand dunes bigger. Obviously weather, we have severe weather events. We don't have tropical storms because we're not in the tropics, but we do have severe depressions, and when we do, we have those destructive waves, and that's when sand dunes can be destroyed by the weather, when we have lots of severe storms. Obviously the waves crash over the foredune and hit the base of the sand dunes and they take away the sand. If we have storms overland, they can obviously hit behind the sand dune and cause what's called a blowout, and that's where we get like a horseshoe shape and sand gets moved and taken away from the sand dune. The geomorphic and hydrologic processes. Sand dunes are formed by Aeolian transport. That's where sand accumulates in one place over time and it forms to make a sand dune. Basically sand can get put there, it dries out, it then gets moved by the wind, and then like I said, a point forms and you get this big accumulation, and then as time goes on the sand dune becomes bigger and bigger and bigger, and then types of vegetation come and in the form of succession comes and stabilizes the dune, and that's what a sand dune is, and that's why it's an ecosystem at risk, because they are fragile and stuff like weather and climate can naturally make them at risk, as well as not having enough sand can lead to the sand dune being destroyed. We've also got those biogeographical processes. So like I said, that on that sand dune, it was just sand, but because of a series of invasions where we don't normally have anything growing on sand, we've got basic grasses that grow from invasion we have succession. So as we go back towards the land away from the sand dune, we'll see that obviously little grasses then turn into bushes, and then as you go farther back you've got trees. Now as you can see behind the information on this slide, you can see that we've got some basic grasses, then we've got this bit of matting, a fence to keep people off the dune, and behind that we've got more and more vegetation. As we go back we can see those trees. That's what succession is. And then obviously those plants have modified themselves to stabilise that dune. So that patches of grass, pig's faces it's called, obviously puts roots into the sand dune to bind them together, and that's how they modify. They like the salt. They can take the salt out of the water and then use the water to feed itself. So that's what we mean by modification, and they're very resilient to change because they can tolerate the sand. However, they can't tolerate lack of sand, because they need sand to stabilise, and then obviously water and that type of thing. So that's where the resilience can be affected. When we've got adjustments to natural stress, obviously storms can destroy sand dunes. They can also produce sand. So after a sand dune, after a storm, we might see a build-up of sand, and that sand dries out and then is transported to the sand dune. And then obviously with vegetation, like I said, with succession, with different forms of plants, and once those plants kick in, they really do stabilise the dune, so much so that you can then build on it. Now, the nature and rate of change can affect the ecosystem function. So remember, functioning is basically how an ecosystem exists. So we've got these sand dunes there that have been built over a long period of time. A lot of materials come to build up those sand dunes, and they're a home for those different types of plant species. And then we've had obviously animals come and make habitats out of those. So when we talk about its functioning, we're talking about its resilience and its vulnerability. So how resilient those sand dunes are to change, and how vulnerable they are to change as well. So when we look at the nature of change, human changes obviously are quite quick, which makes the vulnerability pretty high, and then it will reduce its resilience because humans change environments very quickly, whereas natural change is slow and gradual, and the ecosystem has built up a resilience and reduced its vulnerability to those changes. So for example, if that vegetation didn't get enough water, it's built up its vulnerability because a lot of those plants can withstand going a long period of time without fresh water, or adapted to use the salt water to keep the plants growing. So that's what we mean by slow and gradual change, and how it affects the function in terms of resilience and vulnerability. Of course, nature can be quite cruel, and we do have quick catastrophic events like massive storms, which can take away all of the sand from those sand dunes, and as a result it leaves the dunes exposed, and it will totally disrupt the function of that ecosystem. And there's nothing that the ecosystem can do to increase its resilience and reduce its vulnerability, and we do see over periods of time these sand dunes disappear. When we look at the human impacts, we've got to remember they need to be both positive and negative. We'll start with negative. Obviously, there gets lots of visitors at Shelly Beach, particularly over the hot summer months. And what happens? They bring lots of litter. They obviously bring dogs who do their business on the beach. Not very good. So yeah, lots of visitors can also bring lots of pollution, like litter, that type of thing. Obviously we build on dunes. Obviously we've built the clubhouse there, behind it is the golf course, and then we've got obviously Shelly Beach houses as well. Not a problem here, but if we look up the coast to Wombrel, in the 80s there was a big storm, and as a result the sand dunes became eroded and took away a couple of houses. So construction on dunes damages the dunes because the construction takes away the vegetation and upsets the stability of the dunes, and when we have a big storm, we get that storm undercutting the dunes and washes away buildings. Obviously people, when they come there, when the car park is very full, don't want to park too far away from the clubhouse, they park on the grass, and then obviously killing the grass as well, which isn't good for dune stability, which is negative. And then we have seen on the Central Coast invasive species of weeds. Beto bush was an introduced, it's from South Africa, and was a great way of trying to stabilising these dunes that have been damaged, and people used to plant the beto bush on dunes to stabilise them, but it took over and actually killed a lot of the native species of grasses which grow on sand dunes. So that has become an issue, as well as Latania. Latania is a big weed on the Central Coast, and we don't want that on sand dunes because it will kill the native species of plants there. And then obviously Latania doesn't have a very deep root system like pig's face does, and which will destroy the dunes because there's not that much stability there. And then obviously people walking on sand dunes as well is not good because it kills off vegetation and makes it less and less stable. Hard to do, especially when you know, kids like running up and down it as well. So, you know, not a great thing, but things are being you know, done to reduce those impacts, and that's why we look at the positive impacts. There's netting to protect the sand dunes to try and hold that sand there, and then obviously we've fenced off areas on the sand dune to stop people going on there. We have walkways so people don't start walking on the dunes and damaging vegetation. And then obviously signs to protect the dune, to help people, educate people that it's not okay to walk on dunes, and providing litter bins so people, you know, can take away their rubbish. It doesn't create an eyesore. And then we've paved the car park so people don't park on the grass. There's specific areas for people to park, and they're really positive things to help the sand dunes become, you know, protected. And then management strategies. I've just talked about all the contemporary management strategies, and it can be simple. It's just netting, educating people, keeping people off the sand dunes. Traditional management practices. Obviously, the Central Coast is darkened on land, and there was, you know, lots of evidence, not on Shelly Beach, of middens, which is a cluster of seashells, but there would have been, you know, indigenous people in the area, and they would have used traditional management practices such as like fire stick management, hunting and food seasonal, not taking as much as they needed. So that's where we get those traditional management practices. I hope that gives you a lot of information about Shelly Beach, and giving you lots of information ready to prepare your case studies for the final HSC geography. Any problems, let me know. Make sure you like and subscribe to my videos. Thanks. Bye.